Of course, I was triggered, for want of another word, by the word derive.
Derive.
So as soon as the word
It's a wonderful thing to be triggered by the way, because I'm surrounded by people who are triggered by asinine things all the way. But that's very refreshing that you were triggered by the word derive. I'm here with Brett and Reed, and we're going to do Spectrum Street Epistemology about epistemology.
It is rational to proportion one's confidence to the evidence.
Go.
A core part of street epistemology is the epistemology, and I want to make sure, are we actually using the best theory of epistemology to have these conversations with people? And so I want to ask this question. Does the following sentence make sense? It is rational to align one's confidence to the evidence.
No.
I'll let you two go ahead.
Why you on disagree?
There's only one function for evidence, which is to distinguish between theories or explanations that we've already guessed. And so I can give you a very quick example.
Yeah, sure.
In 1919, it was still uncertain whether or not the correct theory of gravity, as we understand it today, was Newton's theory of universal gravitation or Einstein's theory of general relativity. So until that time, it was still a bit of a toss-up as to what was going to solve problems like the precession of the orbit of Mercury and various other idiosyncratic questions within science.
Okay.
At that time, when they did this experiment called Eddington's experiment, what they did was look at the amount by which light was bent during a solar eclipse behind the moon. All we needed was that one experimental test, which, as it turned out, refuted Newton's theory of gravity, and it conformed with Einstein's general theory of relativity. We needed no more evidence after that. It didn't matter the amount of accumulation of evidence. And in fact, all of the evidence, so-called, that accumulated prior to 1919, supposedly in favour of Newton's theory of gravitation, giving it more credence, making people more confident it was true, making people think it's more rational to believe in Newton's theory of gravity, all of that was completely pushed out of the way by a single observation during the eclipse of the sun by the moon.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand this. So if the claim is there is a framework that appears to have overwhelming evidence in it, your claim is that we ought not to proportion our confidence in the evidence because it's just provisionally true, although you didn't use those words.
Exactly. So I push back against the entire framing of this idea that there can be an accumulation of evidence. It doesn't matter how much evidence you have, it depends upon whether your explanation is good. And once your explanation is good, and in science, usually there is one theory, and it is called the scientific theory. And once you have that, it doesn't matter how much evidence is behind it because it's the only one you've got.
Okay, let me ask you a question if I may. Let's say that the proposition was amended and it is rational proportion of one's confidence to the evidence provided one is willing to change one's mind. Where would you be? Because that would seem to...
I have two problems with the claim.
Okay.
One is that we should proportion our confidence to the evidence, and the evidence somehow or other, when it accumulates, that's the assumption behind this is that we are accumulating an amount of evidence. It's increasing the
likelihood that it's true.
The more that we have, the more confident we should become. But
what's wrong with that assumption?
Confidence has absolutely nothing and no bearing upon whether or not an explanation is good or not. That is the rational thing to do, is to always endorse the explanation. And when there is no explanation, the rational thing to do is to simply say, I don't know. Your confidence matters not a jot, which is why I'm standing on disagree, just by the way, rather than strongly or absolutely, because those are non-binary things. It's like a sliding scale of emotional attachment to particular claims, which I reject as, in my version of rationality, emotion forms no part.
If what you claim is true, how come you're not on the absolutely disagree or the strongly disagree?
my epistemology just tells me that there's no point in inserting feelings into this. So either I am going to agree with the claim or I'm going to disagree with the claim. But as for going any further, that would mean that somehow I'm emotionally attached to this particular claim.
Okay.
So absolutely.
Destiny, you're up. You guys have a conversation.
I don't know if, I don't think I can convince you. I understand if epistemically, if your approach is to attach an absolutely or a strongly to what you're viewing as a binary question, then there's no way that I would even care to move you over here. If you agree or disagree, that's good enough for me. That's a really boring statement, sorry.
What do you disagree about?
Well, it sounds like for him, it sounds like he, if I'm misquoting you, tell me, but it sounds like you were saying that given whether you agree or disagree with the claim, that's a binary statement. And to add an adjective to that, I strongly agree, absolutely disagree, that these adjectives are indicating an emotional attachment to the point rather than a binary epistemic yes or no, basically, or agree or disagree.
It's correct, yeah. This is just a simple disagreement about the epistemological soundness of a spectrum like this, which I've discussed with Peter before. I don't think that it's necessarily I don't think it's necessary for us to have gradations. We can just say we agree or we disagree and then provide our reasons, and the level of emotional attachment we have is irrelevant to the correctness or otherwise.
Okay,
sure, but I think the way that Peter idealizes this is the neutral point is like 0%, and then your level of agreement or disagreement can be measured at like 100 or negative 100.
Correct.
But say somebody says something like, do you think that pineapple should go on pizza? And you're like, should it? I mean, like, it's okay, but it's not my favorite topping. You view that as a binary, then that would be yes, but Peter's like, you'd go on like the 20 or 40% or whatever instead, yeah.
That's exactly how I view it,
Sure.
correct.
But he disagrees. He says, fuck your
Well, he's
epistemic
fucking
bullshit.
wrong.
Yeah. What is the percentage that you assign to this idea of assigning percentages?
So explain to me why confidence doesn't play a role. What to you is the relationship between confidence and evidence?
Zero. There is
really?
zero relationship between confidence. Again, the rational thing to do is to not be confident about whether or not a particular scientific theory is the best scientific theory or not. It's to understand that the scientific theory is the scientific theory, and when you understand that, there's no need to be confident in it, because it is literally the only explanation you have. I could go one step further and say, with general relativity, it is the only explanation, good explanation of gravity that we have now, but I am confident, if you like, that in fact it's false. Because all scientific theories must turn out ultimately to be false. My confidence, or anyone's confidence in the explanation, makes no difference whatsoever to whether or not it's a good explanation.
Okay, so you're both talking about it. It's interesting because I saw that you framed that in terms of the first person. So when you see the best explanation for a phenomenon, one ought not to have confidence in that I don't want to put words in your mouth. One ought not to have confidence in that explanation, and you don't like the word believe from before. So what's the proper psychological stance toward that explanatory framework?
Again, it seems to be bringing in one ought not have confidence. I just think that it's not that one ought to have confidence or ought not to have confidence. It's just that confidence is utterly irrelevant to the project of rationality. Rationality is a binary. You should take on a particular theory as being the explanation of a particular thing, insofar as it explains the evidence. You've got evidence there, and the evidence is crying out for an explanation. And in almost all cases ever, you only have the one explanation.
So your problem is with the very concept of confidence as it relates to the question.
As it has a role in epistemology. I don't think that it does, because epistemology is about the study of knowledge and whether or not one knows a thing or doesn't. It's broader than that, because when I say one knows a thing, immediately you mentioned psychology. We're now talking psychology, whether you know something, I know something, or anything like that. But I think epistemology is much broader than that.
Interesting, because I almost stepped to the absolutely agree, but I was reading or listening to Bill Bryson's brief history of everything. I can't remember the name, but he talks about there are examples of things for which we have no evidence, but we can rationally, and tell me if this hits your point, we have no evidence for these things, and they're not even observable, but we can make rational inferences based upon those. And I was thinking to myself, there could be I guess I'm just caught up then. I'm caught up, which is preventing me from moving. I'm caught up in the idea that it seems like it's epistemological hubris to not, belief is, it's not binary, it's not 1-0. So I'm just caught up in this idea that the prevailing scientific theory or again, I agree, I don't think consensus plays a role, though that's not a word you used. I'm just caught up in this idea that as an agent, as a rational agent, examining the phenomenon, examining the explanation, that explanation, it's not like, and I know you don't like belief, but I'll frame it that way, you can reframe it if you want, but it couldn't be, I believe, you don't lend your belief wholesale to that. You have doubts or your uncertainty or there's something a theory can't explain or solve. And so how would you figure out how sure you were if not for how much evidence there was? Again, unless you want to take, if you want to take confidence out of it entirely, then you're talking about epistemology in the most narrow of possible ways. That would make me move if you redefine the term in terms of, maybe just we're using the term in the wrong way.
You're right when you began by saying belief is not a binary, and I agree with you in the way in which people use it. The problem I have with that is that no one has a way of measuring, let alone anyone else's belief, their own strength of belief. All they can say is, I feel quite strongly about this, or I feel less strongly about this. But ultimately, when you push them, either they know and can give you a good account, in which case they should say, I know this thing, or they cannot. And if they cannot, because they're wishy-washy on it and they say, I'm not really sure if I believe this thing, then they should admit their ignorance and admit their doubt and say, I don't know, and that's it, that's a binary as well.
Okay, I disagree and I'll tell you why. Do you know Reed's middle name?
No.
I think I do, but I'm not sure. Do you? Now, I'll give you, Reed hates when I say this, but I'm going to give you what you're looking for. I'm not going to say believe. You think the world existed before you were born?
Yes.
Can you hold up your hand? Hold up your, do you think that's a hand?
You're going to make me
No,
do a sign.
Do you think that's a hand?
Yes, I know it's a hand.
You know it's a hand.
I know.
What's your confidence in that?
I don't need any confidence. There's only one explanation, which is that this is a hand, and I know what a hand is because I have an explanation about what hands are.
Okay, so I am also confident this is a hand.
I'm not confident.
You're not confident. Okay, but run with me on this.
Okay.
I'm extraordinarily confident it's a hand. I'm extraordinarily confident the world existed before I was born. I'm extraordinarily confident that the woman who is my mother says she is my mother, although I'm not as confident as this is a hand. Now, I know that Reed's middle name begins with a K. I don't remember if it's Kenneth or Keith, but it's one of those. I am less confident in that because I have less evidence for that. So I have proportioned my belief to the confidence that I have in that. So if you said to me, well, how certain are you, walk on a Likert scale, how certain are you that Reed's name begins with a K? I'd be pretty high up here. But if you said to me, how confident are you that the world existed before you were born? I would say absolutely agree.
This situation tends not to arise in rationality except in places like casinos.
It arises literally every day with everything people do, from the instant they wake up.
I disagree with you. When you're making decisions, you either know a thing or don't know a thing, and in the situations that you're talking about, you may have an intuitive feeling that something or other might be the case, in which case, don't do that thing. But I think it still comes down to whether or not you know something or don't know something. You could make a blind left turn into oncoming traffic, not looking, and you could be making an egregious error because you think there's no reason that traffic would be coming that way. But that would be a terrible thing to do and a terrible way to operate throughout your life. But I would say, although you don't know that there's traffic coming, all of your prior experiences and just general rationality would tell you, don't take that risk. It's a casino-like situation. You can expect that, and on at least some number of occasions when you turn into oncoming traffic, there's going to be a truck coming that way and you're going to lose your life. So if they're the kind of situations you're talking about where you're making these decisions, it's a decision-based thing, then yes.
So I guess I just don't understand. But don't rational people calibrate how strongly they think something is true to the best evidence? Now you can say the best explanation, but that's an umbrella term to a certain extent that encompasses evidence. So that's it's kind of cheating, but I'm willing to go for that. Like, that's what it means to be rational. Like, I don't think, oh my God, this place is going to be it's just a stampede of moose that's going to run in here. And you say to me, well, why not? Why do you think that? I'm like, well, we're in Florida. I don't think there's a moose for 500 miles around here. Mooses don't live in this. It's incredibly hot here. There's no reason to believe there's a moose here. So I would be on absolutely disagree.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would just stand at disagree. I don't think there'd be any difference between absolutely disagree and disagree. We would both agree that moose aren't about to come stampeding through the room.
Right, but it would be more rational to stand on the absolutely disagree because of the evidence.
What evidence are you bringing forth?
There's no moose. There's a stampede of.
I don't think it's a matter of evidence, but explanation. What problem are you solving in even invoking this idea? If someone comes towards us now and says there's about to be a moose stampede, my immediate question to them would not be, what is your evidence for this, but explain to me why you think this. What evidence could they bring? I suppose they could take us to the door and show us the moose stampede coming towards us. But I wouldn't even bother doing that, knowing what you tell me about the existence of moose in Florida. I would assume, my immediate assumption would be, crazy person.
Yeah,
not
drugs,
person. Yeah.
LSD or something.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question then, running with the moose example. Guy walks in here, well-dressed, doesn't look like he's insane. He says, holy shit, this is unbelievable. There was a stampede of mooses coming toward us. We need to get out. We need to evacuate immediately. I would be on absolutely disagree. If you telling me sincerely that you would be on disagree, I would tell you, well, let's say that you would be on neutral to make it more stark. I would say that is a less rational alternative than to be on strongly disagree or absolutely disagree. Because I could understand how you could be on strongly disagree. Maybe there's like some moose parade or something like at a zoo, and they have a refrigerated unit with a bunch of mooses and they escaped. But for you to be on neutral, I would argue that's a less rational position. You have miscalibrated your confidence, and thus there's something suspect or damaged about the way you're processing facts and evidence.
I would interpret neutral in that situation as don't know whether this person is telling the truth or being dishonest or is trying to pull the wool over our eyes or is involved in a candid camera type thing. Over here, disagree with him that the moose are about to stampede. I would say, I know he is not telling the truth for whatever reason. Over there, on agree, I would say, for whatever reason, I have a good explanation that he is telling the truth. For example, I saw a news story this morning about moose having escaped from a circus.
But that's an example of how you would use evidence to calibrate your confidence so that you would be able to successfully navigate. So you would need to know whether or not you need to actually escape. Now, I would not even think about walking toward the door.
Yeah, correct. So sometimes evidence absolutely has a crucial role to play in certain situations. For example, in that one, I would have evidence, and the evidence forms part of the explanation as to why I think this person is correct. Absent any evidence whatsoever, well, in fact, I do have evidence. The evidence is that this person is just saying stuff, very poor quality evidence, and I have to set that against explanations about moose and Florida and the likelihood of stampedes and the walls here and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. You wake up this morning in our Airbnb. You hear a news report saying there's going to be the largest display of moose ever in the history of Florida. The guy who comes running in here warning us about the moose stampede has a zookeeper uniform on. And another guy has a little hat that says, like, you know, John's Refrigeration. And they're like, holy shit, dude, the moose are coming. Okay. That would be, bizarrely, but that would be more evidence for you to calibrate your confidence up that the claim that accords with, that there's a lawful alignment in reality between the claim and what is.
Yeah, we agree. I mean, you have just said that we saw something on television that morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So immediately now I have a good explanation. You know, the media has
I
been
see what
involved,
you mean.
and
Okay.
you've got these people who look like they're reliable interlocutors and so on and so forth. So taken all together, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I'm
So
saying
for
absolutely,
you,
but
so for you, is the word explanation and the word evidence, they are synonymous or not synonymous?
they're not synonymous. No, evidence decides between explanations that I guess or that we guess. Or
Got
whatever.
it. So what would the news report would be evidence, but not an explanation, or would it be an explanation?
Well, I'm the one the explanations come from within me. So I have to generate an explanation about the news report. For example,
Okay.
I might very well see the news report, and then a moment later it cuts to, SNL's 50th anniversary, and then I recalibrate, as you say. I come up with a new explanation. Oh, this is actually a parody of a news report.
Right.
On the other hand, if it's regular CNN, I go, okay, that's an
Well,
explanation.
then I wouldn't believe it, but yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But okay, but a source that we trust. Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, I think we've explored that one, Reed.
Okay.
So let's do one more thing. So can I move based upon what you said? I think if I interpret that claim, is it rational proportional one's confidence to the evidence? I think I could move to agree, given the role of explanation and how you use explanation, but I would have to see the claim rewritten in such a way, like if you could kind of rewrite the claim that keeps the sentiment the same, I would move to, I might actually move to slightly agree too. How about that claim? It is rational proportional one's confidence to sufficient explanations.
You see, I want to meet you halfway, but the thing is that the epistemological worldview that you're coming from is so deeply mired in emotion, feeling, and the subjective psychology of people. So the mere presence of the word confidence is putting us in a worldview of how do you feel about this particular thing, rather than an objective analysis of argument, evidence, explanation, all of these things.
Maybe that's our point of dispute. Maybe that's our point of disagreement. When I say confidence, I mean you've looked at the evidence, whatever the evidence happens to be, you've had some kind of a way to adjudicate truth or falsity, you've had a way to weigh it out in some kind of way, and then you form so you also have like micro levels of confidence. Like, you just saw the news quickly, or I only know the K thing because sometimes I don't even know how I got an email or something, I can't remember, but you have to if you don't like confidence, would you be satisfied with the way, because I don't, ultimately it's a subjective thing.
It is rational to change your mind when the evidence refutes your theory.
Is that the new claim?
Well, that would be the only way I could frame this claim in order for me to move or to.
Well, where would you be?
I've got an interesting claim.
All right.
Making rational decisions is easier when you use the concept of confidence,
Oh, wow, that is a good one.
or when you take into account your own confidence in the truth of a claim or something. Because it's like, if I'm extremely certain that I'm using a good explanation, or I'm using, beliefs that are absolutely true, basically, and I need to make a decision based on them, the more confident I am, the easier it is to at least make decisions. It may not be a rational decision, but
Yeah, so I moved to absolutely agree to that.
okay.
Are you staying there?
I'm staying here. Yeah.
So I've seen that anecdotally. I don't even know 30,000 students. I don't even know tens of thousands of students. I've seen that. I've seen that in the literature. I've seen that in what I've read. I've seen that in my discussions of people who work in the field. Making rational decisions is easier when using the concept of confidence. I'm trying to think of an example that would make that false. I'm trying to think of a single instance. I guess I could kind of think of one like you come home and you need to do your laundry. Mm-hmm. You take your husband's clothes out of the
Washing machine?
no whatever they on the floor. You pick them up off the floor, and you are about to throw it into the laundry machine, but you figure you should clean the pockets. So you clean the pockets and you find condoms, and you're like, "What's up here? You've got condoms." He's like, "No, those are not my condoms. A friend gave those to me because he didn't want his husband to see it, and I just held them for him." So this, I'm trying to get to this claim. Tell me if this makes sense to you. And he's telling you the truth, because when he's with his lover, they never use condoms. So you're trying to make a rational decision, assuming you're monogamous, of course. You're trying to make a rational decision to figure out if he's lying based upon the evidence that comes in, as opposed to, and you have this history with him. Does that example?
No, it depends upon the explanation I have of what's going on.
Well, his explanation for you is that he didn't want his friend's husband to find the condom, so he gave it to him at the last minute. He just slipped it to him.
Okay, then that's the explanation. Then yes, I accept the explanation, and it's not a matter of confidence. I have no compete.
But you have to be. So okay, so are you 100% positive that he's telling you the truth?
Never. But,
Okay, are you 80? Are you okay? So the moment that you say that, then anything other than 100, the moment that you admit that, you're talking about confidence.
Make it a very, very clean example. This is why I like to always take epistemology from science, because it's just so clean. And so
I was thinking real life, but give me the example.
These are real life, but it's just like, you either have a good explanation or not. Okay, so the creationists come along and they point to the fossils in the rocks and they go, look, evidence of a flood that happened 6,000 years ago where all the big animals sank into the mud.
Okay.
There's their evidence. How confident are they in that? It's utterly irrelevant to me how confident anyone happens to be in that theory when I know I'm not 100% sure, 80% sure, 50% sure, or anything like that. I can't put a number, because when people say that, they're pulling numbers out of their ass, literally. There's no way of you being able to say I'm 100% versus 80%. There is no metric of that. There is an explanation of things like what fossils are, namely dinosaurs, which existed 62 plus million years ago.
So in part you're talking about Bayesian reasoning.
No, yeah, I'm rejecting Bayesian reasoning.
I understand that. Right, I understand it. So, okay, maybe that's the point of contention. If you were to accept Bayesian reasoning, so that's a new claim. If one accepts Bayesian reasoning, then it makes sense to view epistemology in terms of confidence.
You want to do that?
You want to do that? Let's do that one.
Well,
if one accepts Bayesian reasoning, it makes sense to
express things in terms of confidence, yes.
Okay. Okay, so that means you're rejecting Bayesian reasoning.
Yeah.
Okay, but there are competing explanations for things. This is what I understand. There are competing explanations for things. Over time, we develop new technologies, we test hypotheses, we develop maybe hopefully theories, we refine our knowledge of the world. Maybe we find out that something was junk science, or someone falsified their data, or what have you. And so, don't you have to have confidence in the explanations?
Specific examples are always really helpful here, because when the Bayesians say, but we have a whole bunch of different explanations and we need to weigh our confidence in them. Firstly, there's
priors.
Priors, and we update our priors.
Right.
Update our priors often means create a new explanation wholesale. However, it is almost never the case that we have more than one explanation in any given domain. Often we have zero. For example, what is dark energy? What is dark matter? No clue, no one has an idea. Or we have one explanation, in which case it's the only thing that we can make decisions on the basis of. You make a decision on the basis of the best explanation. Usually we only have one. In the rare case where we have two, the very rare case, we do what's called a crucial experiment, which rules out one. I began the conversation about Eddington's experiment ruling out Newtonian theory.
Okay, now, can I pause you right there? So let's say that you're at that juncture and you're not sure which is which. Like you're a sincere inquirer, you're doing your best to figure it out. You don't think anybody's fabricated data. Wouldn't your confidence be 50-50 at that point in time?
But that is trying to express the worldview I'm saying in Bayesian terms. You
Correct.
could say
That's
that.
correct.
You could say that. You could say it's a 50-50, but then you're also wanting to say, I would want to bet money on each of these and I wouldn't bet money either way necessarily. I would expect not to win. But the more rational thing to do, rather than saying it's 50-50, is to say, I don't know.
I have no problem with that, but if there are only two possible explanations for a thing, and you say, I don't know, yes, it's honest, yes, it's the best response to that. And if you were pressed on that, if someone said, well, what do you think the odds of this are? Wouldn't your confidence have to be split?
It's never the case that there are only two possible explanations, but it is often not often the case, but it is rarely the case that there are only two explanations known. And the rational thing to do at that point is not to bet or to talk about probabilities, but rather to devise an experimental test which will distinguish between them.
So you genuinely want to extirpate confidence from the soil of reasoning. Like you just want to like completely uproot it.
Yes, because ultimately it's subjective, it's not objective. It is a feeling, an emotion, something that comes from our psychology. Bayesian reasoning ultimately is subjective, psychological, and not rational.
So when you're talking about applied epistemology, not the stuff that your fellow Australian Tim Van Gelder does at social epistemology, but when you're talking about the kind of stuff that we do on an individual level, do you think that the original framing, I can't remember what I was because I don't remember the original claim.
Can I ask you
something that you want?
Yeah. So I've been sort of a bit harsh in giving you a nice clean example where I say, and I often go back to this example of, look, the purpose of the evidence is to decide between theories, right? And so once you've got evidence...
Or among?
Very, very rarely you're going to have, 3, 4, 5 different explanations. Again, the purpose of an experiment is to rule out
a universe from nothing, but okay, go.
But what is an example drawn from science or elsewhere where you think that accumulating ever more evidence is going to increase your confidence? But what is the situation where...
Evolution? I mean, virtually anything you could think of does that.
But you only have one
at the
explanation.
at the Scopes monkey trial, just as an example, they don't have anywhere near the evidence that we have now for evolution.
I would just say the evidence there is irrelevant because your choice is between a very good explanation from Charles Darwin about the origin of species and versus magic.
But there I go again with the confidence. Maybe this is a criticism of myself, or maybe it's not. But you would be far more confident in your explanation than the other explanation. I guess I'm trying to think, like, what would it even look like to not have confidence in anything? You could just, it just throws me into because epistemology, to me, the way I think about it at a non-social applied level of the individual, has to take in some kind of psychological disposition of the people, has to take in some kind of social phenomenon, degree of belonging, degree of, like, I don't have a sanitized Platonic or just crystal clean view of applied epistemology. It participates in multiple domains. That's how I think about it.
I think so too. It's just that when talking examples, it's very easy to draw them out of science. And as you just said there, that, okay, we've got more, I agree with you, there is lots of evidence that we can talk about in the domain of evolution in order to show that this is a great explanation. But the point is, it is the only explanation. The other side, the creationists, have no explanation.
Okay. So just run with me. We both agree with this. That's Haldane's The Precambrian Rabbit. Find me a rabbit in the Precambrian age. This is how I think about it. I am extraordinarily confident of the facts of evolution. We frame it to you that way. But holy shit, we find a Precambrian rabbit. What, you're laughing about what?
I know the response to this.
Go ahead.
I will grant you.
No, go ahead.
If there is a rabbit found in the Precambrian, Haldane was wrong to say that this would be a refutation of evolution by natural selection. It will be a problem for evolution by natural selection because we could easily imagine a scenario where an isolated community of living organisms has evolved far more quickly towards rabbits than anywhere else on planet Earth. And so that would be the explanation of why the rabbit is there rather than refuting evolution by natural selection.
Okay, so then again, that's an example of how you're claiming confidence wouldn't come into it at all.
Yes, and moreover, can I just add one thing?
Sure, of course.
That if you found the rabbit in the Precambrian, to say that the rabbit in the Precambrian would refute evolution by natural selection leaves you with nothing. If you refute evolution by natural selection, what is the explanation then? What, do you jump to God? Do you say, the creationists were right?
No, you'd
of
have
course
to
you
come
don't.
up with a better explanation.
Exactly.
Or
you
you'd
just
have
stick
to
with
say that
existing
the
one.
example, that's not a defeasibility or a falsification criterion.
Well, I would just say that you've got nothing else you've got no other way of explaining this rabbit except by saying, well, it must have evolved some way. We just don't understand how. But hey, interesting problem. Scientists get to work on figuring out what the lineage of this rabbit is.
Again, I'm trying to think of how to frame this without using confidence. Like, I'm trying to think about how, at an individual level, okay, let me do this. Maybe this is easier. You're the guy who goes out there in the dig, and you're with your buddies, and lo and behold, you discover this. In those moments when you discover it, not would your confidence not be shaken, but would it not be rational for your confidence to be shaken if that were discovered?
The only emotion I would have, and I think most scientists would have at that point, is massive amount of excitement. Wow, this is a problem, this is exciting, I'm going to be famous because I'm going to be put into the popular science journals tomorrow, people are going to be having
excitement,
me on.
Okay.
But confidence
excitement is one thing. Would you be surprised?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if you were surprised, then that must mean that your confidence was lower, or you wouldn't be surprised.
No. Every scientist wants to come to a discovery, wants to be surprised. They don't want to just go through life just incrementally altering what existing knowledge is. They want to have a problem which they can spend many, many months and years solving. So this rabbit would be an exciting research project for a whole bunch of people and likely employ a whole bunch of people to figure out this thing, which won't refute evolution by natural selection, but might tell us something really new about how fast evolution happens, for example.
All right, I'll move.
All right. Confidence also it seems to be a religious hangover for me. The whole way of framing epistemology in terms of confidence, belief, how strongly one thinks about something, it seems to be harking back to, you've got to have faith, and the degree of faith that you have tells me how good of a religious person you are, how good of a Christian you are, how likely it is you're going to get into heaven and that kind of thing. Whereas if you just have the stance that either you've got a good explanation or you don't, your feelings on the matter are utterly irrelevant.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
All right. I have another claim.
All right.
Let's go back to neutral. This is a quick one, then I'll go to another one that's connected to this. We should only make decisions based upon knowledge. Go.
When you're making decisions, you either know a thing or don't know a thing, and in the situations that you're talking about, you may have an intuitive feeling that something or other might be the case, in which case don't do that thing. But I think it still comes down to whether or not you know something or don't know something.
I'm just thinking about where on this. I think I'm here, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I could easily be swayed to go one mat to the left or right, because I'm thinking about being in love with someone. Like, I'm thinking about emotional relationships. And I guess if you, I don't know, I'm just thinking about like what you would have to know. Like, do you know the person isn't like a creep or a pedophile or like some crazy drug addict doing crazy shit, or like has some, I don't know, like secret life about, killing people or something you don't know, but I'm thinking about this in terms of romantic relationships.
Even emotions are a form of knowledge, or can give you, or can be regarded as an inexplicit form of knowledge. So oftentimes you might not be able to express in explicit language, write an essay that is completely coherent about why you might be in love, why this person is the person for you. But this is not to deny the fact that things like intuitions, your general feeling, all of these, in my worldview, count as knowledge. Knowledge.
No, I would say that's correct. Intuition certainly factor into it. I guess I guess I'm kind of caught up on knowledge.
So let's do this claim. For something to count as knowledge, it must be justified, true, and a belief.
Go ahead.
See, now we're friends.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the reason that I basically use so you tell me what you're thinking, then I'll tell you why I think that's just a good kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Knowledge is not justified, not true, and should not be believed. And
Okay.
the
Then
example.
how come you're not over there?
Well, because I don't believe in degrees of confidence or degrees
then
of.
you don't agree with the whole game, then I guess.
As I said, it's either don't know, or
Okay.
refuse to know. So something like I know, and every single physics student knows, and this is the one that I beat to like a dead horse. I'm constantly referring to it. Isaac Newton's universal law of gravitation. F equals gm1 m2 over r squared. Every single physics student knows it. Every physics professor can recite it. They know it, but they simultaneously know it's not true. They shouldn't believe it because it's not true, and there's no possible way of justifying it because it's been refuted by experiment, and yet it counts as knowledge. And almost all of science, in fact, all of science is like that, and not just science, mathematics, morality, and everything.
Okay. So so let me now explain why I'm here. So there are many, like in philosophy of Gettier problems. You've written about that, about my story that I posted.
The story was great.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm also here. Let me tell you why we use that. Because I found that most people don't even understand the concept that evidence should play a role in how they live their lives. Like, it's so alien to think about evidence or evaluating and analyzing that when you talk to people on the street, you find that they really are in desperate need of some rudiments of this stuff to help them navigate or make complex decisions in an increasingly complex world. So yeah, I'm on the disagree, but I find that it's very useful. That's a very useful way to frame it. So that, like, you get it, it's usable, it's from Plato's Theaetetus, and you can, yeah. So that's why I do. It's not I'm very conscious of it, though.
Yeah. Look, it's a wonderful escape from authoritarian versions of epistemology. Most of our reasoning capacities began in dark, tribal, religious communities where people were told, believe this based upon my authority as the chief or the medicine man or the priest, and therefore no evidence is required. So empiricism, for example, the idea that you just get evidence from looking around and observing the universe was an escape from that kind of authoritarianism. And it said to the individual, now you have the power to gather the evidence and to make a decision based upon the evidence without recourse to the priest or the politician or whoever it happens to be with more authority than you. So that was an improvement. However, it's still false.
Kind of an intellectual Protestantism.
Yeah.
Or epistemological
yeah.
Protestantism.
Empiricism, inductivism, all of that stuff, although wrong compared to the kind of epistemology that I'm espousing here, nonetheless is better than just saying that evidence is not important at all.
Yeah, and I want to throw something else out to you. It's more easy for the average person to grasp that. Mm-hmm. And once people grasp that, overwhelmingly they can live a better life. Overwhelmingly.
That evidence is relevant to decisions.
Yeah. Not kind of moral authority from on high. Just tribalism, what your tribe says. Yeah.
Don't hand over your critical faculties to someone in a position of authority or to anyone else, really. You need to think for yourself.
So moving people on that scale, I would argue, in the public domain is extraordinarily valuable.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with Brett on this new to me in the past 2 years since the beginning of Infinity, reading that knowledge is resilient information, that it's not something that can start just, as some conjecture in the mind. It's in our genes. It's an objective thing that's instantiated physically in the universe, whether in genes or within a pattern within our minds. That's abstract knowledge, which can be implanted into books and be put on, satellites that go out into the universe. And for it to count as knowledge, it needs to be resilient information. So information that has been checked and criticized, and it stands up to either criticism that uses the physical world to check it through experiment, or just reason broadly, that type of thing. Am I on the
That's
track?
brilliant. Yeah. The concept of knowledge as being resilient information is so deep and powerful. It actually says that knowledge is the one thing in the universe that will survive far beyond even the most resilient rocks that exist on the universe. So for example, there are strands of DNA in certain bacteria that have been around for 3.5, 4 billion years. There's no structure on planet Earth that has been around for that long. It's an amazing fact about reality.
I would like to reset. I want to go off something that you said, Brett. We only need 2 mats. Move.
We can just say we agree or we disagree and then provide our reasons, and the level of emotional attachment we have is irrelevant.
Okay, I want to do one more. Or you didn't move. You're the
I was neutral after that.
Maybe 3, because you might want to. It depends on the question, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose if neutral were I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so you only need 2 or 3 mats.
Yeah.
Okay.
All scientific theories are false,
Move.
but I am confident, if you like, that in fact it's false, because all scientific theories must turn out ultimately to be false.
Yeah. You want to explain that?
Do you want to?
Well, I mean, you go first, and then I'll go.
Everything we know contains misconceptions, so this is just a special case. In fact, all knowledge claims are false in some way. The conjunction of a true statement and a false statement is logically a false statement. And although scientific theories contain lots of truth, hopefully heaps of truth, they will nonetheless contain at least something that's false, making them overall false.
Yeah, I was going to, that's probably better than mine. I was going to talk about it in terms of a refinement. But yeah, that's better than mine. We reset.
So Brett, can you explain what the bucket theory of the mind is?
Yeah, do you want me to do it from here?
Yeah,
or?
just from here, and then we'll make it to a claim.
So the bucket theory of mind is that knowledge is kind of like a fluid, and it is operating in the background of every single classroom across the entire world, where students sit there as inert passive vessels.
Oh, it's called direct instruction.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. The philosophy of education seems to be that so long as the person up the front keeps talking, that the knowledge will flow like fluid into the person's bucket as a receptacle. And so Karl Popper talked about the bucket versus the searchlight, and the searchlight is you're trying to figure out for yourself what's actually going on. Conjecture. The knowledge comes from within rather from without.
Yeah, that claim. All explanatory knowledge comes from within. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Yeah, all explanatory knowledge comes from within. Go.
Well, I'm the one the explanations come from within me, so I have to generate an explanation about the news report.
Go ahead.
It depends what you mean. If you mean that, like I was just thinking about, I was thinking about a bunch of things, like a kid raised by a wolf. And I was thinking about all explanatory knowledge comes from within. You know, you need some kind of a linguistic structure. Wittgenstein talked about this. Charles Sanders Peirce talked about this. You need some kind of or wrote about this. You need some kind of a linguistic structure to format what the explanatory knowledge is. And so I don't think the question even makes sense without that. And the moment you admit that, you have some kind of, you really can't be, well, you couldn't be there on the strongly agree, absolutely. I don't see how you could even be on the agree. All explanatory knowledge comes from within. I think about that claim linguistically.
That would make my case even stronger, I would suggest, because clearly children learn to speak language, and it's the one thing that generally children do not need to be explicitly taught. They're around people and they, from within, generate grammatical rules, vocabulary, language in general. And so they are guessing at the meaning of words and producing from within them, quite often, sentences that have never been spoken in the history of humanity. And we all do that each of us every single day.
Right.
All of the explanations we come up with, whether scientific or just in our day-to-day life, we are guessing at and we are generating from within our minds rather than extracting from the world.
When you say from within, I'm thinking about, I don't know, figuring out Mercury's perihelion, or I'm thinking about Galileo's telescopes, or I'm thinking about scientific phenomenon from which you need instruments. Understanding that, and maybe you don't like the word understanding because it's subjective, but the claim is somewhat subjective too, or having an explanation for that to frame it in that couldn't come from within because those instruments are external to oneself, and you need those instruments to understand the phenomenon in the first place, so then it couldn't come from within.
The instruments are outside of your mind, and even the evidence that they gather are outside of your mind. But once more, how you interpret that evidence is not a matter of just coming from without. So,
right, and that's why I'm not further down. I thought about standing on the neutral, but that's why I'm not further down.
Just remember that evidence itself is not explanatory knowledge. You
That's
can have an
correct.
explanation of the evidence, but the claim is that all explanatory knowledge comes from within. Not that all evidence comes from within.
No,
that comes from within.
that's right. So I guess, again, we'd have to talk about what we meant by knowledge. And I don't want to be pedantic, but I think that when we're talking about claims like this, I think my interpretation of these words is somewhat different from yours. I think, and I could be wrong about this, I think we'd be more closely aligned if maybe we should just disambiguate the terms before we move next time.
Well, I can add something small here, which is that evidence is a kind of information. And a lot of the evidence, like if you're a biologist or something and you're taking readings of like how bright the sky is because you're studying certain birds or whatever it happens to be, a lot of the information and data that you gather, it counts as evidence, but it might be completely useless and you might disregard it because it's been corrupted or whatever it happens to be. The evidence that you keep, the evidence that you copy, the evidence that ends up in the scientific paper, that can form part of your explanatory knowledge. So not all evidence even is going to be relevant. And so some of that evidence is going to be information that's not important, which is why I don't want to use the word divine because I don't like defining things, but one way of coming at this concept of knowledge is to say it is information that tends to get itself copied. Which is not all, most information doesn't get itself copied. It gets thrown into the waste paper basket of history. In fact, just into a waste paper basket and completely lost. But that which is kept counts as knowledge.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking about the E.D. Hirsch's, what every educated American, what educated people should know, and this idea of a canon of knowledge, and what counts as a canon, and how you figure out what counts as a canon, and how to buttress that from the social winds, or maybe the social winds ought to determine on. It's a different question, but I do think that there are timeless ways to think about problems. That's why I think, when you talked about Newtonian mechanics, I think that there's something incredibly useful. John Dewey calls this like a museum conception of art. When you go into an art museum and there are just different pieces, and that frames. So it's not seeing the art in the original context. I think there's something interesting about, something important for people, maybe this is a disagreement or another claim, to study what people thought worked or what were good explanations at the time and what changed those. It veers a little bit from the claim, but I think it bears on how we think of knowledge apropos of what you just said.
Let's do two more real quick. Moral facts objectively exist.
Oh, that's a good one.
I love it. All of science is like that, and not just science, mathematics, morality, and everything.
Okay, before you say anything, it is possible to derive a moral fact from pure reason.
So just through reason, thought experiments, we can rationally derive certain values that way? That's one example.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can
Go
give
ahead.
an argument against that, but that's my current view. I don't understand how someone could be on the slightly for that question. It would seem like that would be a very rare case I think we could rule out a mat. So I think in order to talk about morality, you have to have content for that. And I'm thinking about, aliens on a different planet, with a different physiology, subject to different evolutionary conditions. The whole concept wouldn't even make sense. I mean, I guess you could import notions that we've developed, species-centric notions, or I would argue they're species-centric notions, utilitarian notions, deontological notions, but you would have to have some evidence that informed how you would even think about the problem of morality and how you would reason to certain conclusions. But I don't see how you could do that absent any evidence. I mean, maybe I'm limited by my imagination. I don't see how that would be possible.
Mm-hmm. You're taking a very different road to what I was thinking. Of course, I was triggered, for want of another word, by the word derive.
Derive.
So as soon as the word
It's a wonderful thing to be triggered by the way, because I'm surrounded by people who are triggered by asinine things all the way. But that's very refreshing that you were triggered by the word derive.
And that's because, again, my epistemological worldview refutes the notion that we derive any kind of facts from anywhere. We don't derive the facts of nature from our observations. We don't derive scientific theories from inductive reasoning, and we don't derive moral facts from pure reason. We don't derive. What we do is we guess at a solution to a problem. So when we encounter a moral conundrum, we go, I wonder what the best thing to do in this particular situation is, and we rule out a whole bunch and we're left with one.
Even then, though, you have evidence. Like you have a framework to derive something in the first place. Like if I said to you, there are these creatures living in some distant galaxy, you have no idea anything about the creatures. You don't even know if they're biomechanical. Like you have no idea if they're the ancestors of I don't see how you I don't understand how you could. I don't even understand how you could, but you don't like the word derive. I don't even understand how you could derive a moral fact. Well, we agree they're moral facts, but how could you derive those without some? You would have to. I'm working. Like you would have to know. You'd have to know something about what you're deriving. Like you'd have to have some context in which that framework is operative.
Yeah. We get the word fact in this particular situation is also ambiguous. Does it mean that there is this sort of abstract reality of moral claims in the same way that there are mathematical entities that are out there which stand apart from, that's the subject matter, let's say, of morality or of mathematics. In mathematics we say the subject matter of mathematics is necessary truth, but it's not the reward we get for doing mathematics. There's a difference between the knowledge created about mathematics and the subject matter of mathematics. And the same might be true of morality as well, that there are these pristine, ideal principles of morality that we don't have direct access to, but we come to guess at and have ideas about and generate moral knowledge about in order to solve particular problems. And that also stands apart from the evidence as well.
Yeah. I guess I was I just fell down an intellectual rabbit hole and thinking like, you would say about moral expertise. Like there's expertise at playing a piano, but you would have to know or there's expertise in. You would even have to have the concept of music or pianos. Like you can't just. It doesn't come ex nihilo. Like you can't reason to these things in an ontological vacuum.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
So I think we can safely rule out that side of the scale. So then the only question becomes is, where should we be on this side of the scale?
Yeah, I think what we're getting at is we shouldn't think about how we come to any knowledge at all about deriving, from the outside something to get into our brain to know it. We guess it. We guess a solution to a problem we're in, and then we criticize that conjecture, that guess.
Yeah, you guess it, and again, that's why I'm not triggered by anything, but I'm not triggered by derive, because I guess I just look at it, in one sense I look at it propositionally. And so you have a bunch of propositions and you're interpreting those propositions and then you're inferring a moral fact from those. So the derive, that's why I don't have a problem with derive, unless I'm missing something. I could be missing something.
The way I interpret derive is the way in which a mathematician would derive a conclusion. So you start with a whole bunch of axioms and you work through using the rules of inference, get to your conclusion. And so people think that this is how reasoning in general works, that how to be a rational person is to begin with you. And so
it's axiomatic, and then correct.
Yes, and so when people want to eliminate God from the picture or religious moralizing from the picture, quite often what the atheist will do, and I count myself among the atheists, is to replace God and religion and the holy book and the authorities there with a new thing that cannot be questioned. You know, let's hold up, this is the moral principle, and that cannot be questioned, and from that we will derive all of our other moral facts, and I reject that move.
Yeah, I also think it's this idea of foundationalism and morality is a mistake.
Yes.
But I think it's a kind of vestige from a religious or a different. Yeah, I'm trying to think of another word from religions, but I think that's the best one, probably impolitic to say. But all right, Reed, you want to do that one?
Want to just wrap up in the middle here?
What'd you think of that?
It's an amazing exercise. I like doing sort of stuff like this. It's a lot of fun to just talk to people that have a different view, and especially on the stuff that I'm absolutely fascinated by, which is epistemology. And I know that we don't share all of our epistemology, but I think we are converging on a whole bunch of things. And
I think we converge on the outcomes, the usefulness, the role in one's life. You know what? I wanted to ask you a question. I always say that your epistemology should precede everything, should precede your morality, should be like the first order of business. Before you're an activist, you have to figure out should I be you have to, unless your epistemology is cleaned up, everything else in your life, you could go astray in any one of a number of different directions.
Yeah.
So I guess the difference that I see is you're operating more in the theoretical or the pure realm, and I'm being soiled by the world. I have a kind of practical, lived, I just want to help people think through problems, and so I don't want to say more pedestrian, but I think I have a less pure, less theoretic approach to it. Do you think that's an accurate characterization?
The bus driver, the builder, the doctor, even the scientist can make a heck of a lot of progress and move throughout their lives by having a false epistemology, and yet they still manage to succeed. It's only on certain niche occasions where it really makes a difference.
Yeah, so let me ask you a question. Do you think that they succeed in their friendships as well? Like if somebody had because I write about this a lot, but Aristotle's concept of friendship, of the highest form of friendship is between two virtuous people. I would argue that I'm not sure one can be virtuous unless one has a reality that somewhat corresponds to reality. I mean, an epistemology that corresponds to reality. I'm thinking like if you were like let's say that somehow you were able to rule out something de facto as false, like, I don't know, you believe in some God and he tells you to do a bunch of things, and you sincerely believe those things and hold those things. I would argue that your friendship with someone, because it wasn't based on something that was real of what a good life actually is, would be corrupted by the fact that your epistemology wasn't as rigorous as it could have been, and you could have had a deeper friendship and deeper relationships with people had you cleaned up your epistemology.
Absolutely. And
you agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, of course, it gets worse in the extreme cases where someone becomes religiously super dogmatic, and they might even become, antagonistic towards you, or violent in the worst cases, and decide to take up, jihadist violence or something. So that's all a consequence of having the wrong epistemology, handing over your critical faculties again to the authority, religious or otherwise.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Reed?
And it was my pleasure. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice to be participating rather than being behind the scenes. It was great.
Cool. Awesome.
All right, great.